I haven't seen these before, so I'm going to ask
I
you.
haven't.
Save the difficult ones for later. So here's an interesting one. Is there a? They're all interesting, but is there a design to our lives, or is it just random events that fit into the world? You know, we're trying to fit into the world and deal with the sort of the randomness of existence, or is there some greater design to it all?
Thank you. So good morning? No, just
Afternoon. Just
to everyone.
afternoon.
Just afternoon. I think that's a very interesting question. And I think I would throw the question back to all of you, although I know you may not have asked this particular question at this time. But what does your experience tell you? Things are not just random, are they? Also, you know, when you look at your life, I know when I look at my life, I see a certain pattern of events, and I can also see the point at which I became responsible for setting that pattern of events in motion. And I know that we often underestimate the power of our thoughts. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, something like The Secret, where you have affirmations, you know, I want a car, I want, you know, I think that's a very materialistic concept, actually. But I'm talking about the subtle thoughts you have inside of what you want to achieve, or what you think is right. And those subtle thoughts, they're more than thoughts, actually. They're thoughts, inspirations, sometimes desires that drive you, and they set in motion a whole sequence of events that take your life in a certain direction. And so I don't think things are random. And that's why when we study spiritual teachings, when we study meditation, we become very aware of our thoughts and the intention behind every action. So if my intention behind action is a very pure intention of benevolence, and I really want the good for others, it's not a self-serving, selfish intention, I set up a train of goodness that then comes back to me like an echo. I always think of thoughts like thoughts that I set in motion come back to me like an echo. But if I have any kind of negative intention, or I won't even say negative in that sense of hating someone or something, but a little bit of dissatisfaction with which I do something, then things come back to me in that way. And it can happen in a short time scale or a long time scale. And just recently coming somewhere, and there was a little bit of an argument about when we started the journey about something very trivial. Okay, forget it, carry on. But then somehow the journey just didn't go smoothly. And so one was a big traffic hold-up, and when we got through that, there was a puncture. And so a journey of 1 hour took, I think, about 3 hours. And there was something in the way the whole thing got set up. And if there's a smooth flow in your thinking, in your motivation, in your attitude, things flow in life. And if not, then you set up other kinds of reactions. And so I don't think things are random. And although things often appear random, now I'm bringing in another concept here which may or may not be familiar to you, but it's not just something that happens in this life, but things carry on from one life to another. Now that's something to think about, isn't it? You know, people say, why is this happening to me? Some energy, something that was in my being, my thinking, my attitude, way in the past, has brought this to me now, at this present time. And so that's why it's so important to clean out your attitude, clean out your feelings, so that you really do have benevolence within. It's very important. And it's not easy, because sometimes people are doing things that you feel are very unjust. And I remember, and part of our teachings are that, have good wishes for everybody, no matter what. And I remember once somebody calling me and they asked me, another BK, Brahma Kumari student, and they said, a friend of mine or somebody I know has done something really bad to a friend of mine, and I just want to go and throttle them, how you feel the injustice, sometimes not so much to yourself, but more towards what you see happening to someone else. And I know we're taught to have good wishes for everyone, but how can I have good wishes? And so I just paused myself, and then I said, okay, what would you feel would be the best outcome for that person? And they stopped and they said, well, I suppose that they would understand what they've done, they'd realise, they'd change themselves, they'd apologise, they'd move forward. I said, well, that's good wishes. To turn around the idea of revenge to the idea of wanting a person to move forward in life and change that tendency that leads them to do those negative things, because our tendencies lead us to do certain things, and then it leads us to happiness or sorrow. So definitely things are by design, and who's doing the designing? Us. Yes, I can say too that God has an overall plan for the world, but that's a very high-level plan, if you like, because the world is in a very difficult situation now. And I do understand that God's plan is to make a better world for us. But we have to play our part in that. And we are each of us creating our own destinies. So this is a very deep philosophy to consider. But don't be scared, just feel good about things and start to clean out your intentions, and you will feel much happier. That's the whole point. When you're moving according to your conscience, your core values, your inner feelings of what you know is right, rather than being influenced by what other people want or the conventions of society, you feel happier inside and you feel a better flow in your life. And even if challenges come, you're able to then have a positive perspective to overcome them and move forward and actually make a golden opportunity out of them.
Yeah. So in terms of the actual activity, the practice, the focus for the self, it's about turning things to a positive direction, having that attitude. Does that then in a way kind of like reveal to you what your individual part in life is, or I mean, how does that side of things work?
Yeah, that's also interesting because I think we all have a purpose in life, and the overall purpose is to have a good life and a happy life. That's again the big picture in a sense, or the overarching purpose. But within that, I don't know about you, but I know that from an early age, I had a feeling that I have to do something special in life. I didn't know what it was, and I almost couldn't give myself permission to think it. But I knew something inside that my life's not going to be ordinary now. You know, where destiny was going to take me, I had no idea. And now when I look back over especially these 38 years of the spiritual life, you know, things I could never have dreamt of or imagined, and opportunities have opened up amazingly. But, you know, especially starting a spiritual path, you begin to give voice to that feeling and you begin to let it grow and you begin to get the confidence. And I'm not talking about a confidence in terms of ego, you know, confidence building, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but a quiet inner trust of yourself and a trust in God and allowing God to guide you. And then things open up for you and you begin to discover not just a purpose, but you see the purpose manifest. And I always think that the purpose is not so much about what you do, but about who you are and how you are being in life. Because we remember great people not because they ran a country or they ran an organization or they helped so many millions of children. That's also very good, of course. But we remember them for their compassion, their moral stature, their kindness, their clarity of vision. We remember them for the being that they are. And that's where my real purpose gets played out.
Mm. Okay, well, I mean, that's a perfect segue onto a very specific question here. Someone's asking, should I go to India and be a yoga teacher? So if someone's had that thought, how might they, given what you've just said, how might they
develop it?
Or how might they check whether that's the right thing for them, maybe?
Right, because I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, you should, and no, you shouldn't. That's not my role. But yes, you know, to check those inner feelings, is something right or not? Actually, I usually know when I have a thought, if it's the right thing, there's like no question about it, actually. You know it, and you find a way to do it. And you don't leave a space between knowing it and doing it. And this is something I've learnt by trial and error or pain and error. That when I've had a very pure thought and then I've not put it into practice at that time, it just sticks, you know. I just feel there's some opportunity that I've missed. And if I try to do it a month later, it doesn't work. It feels like I'm forcing something and it feels uncomfortable. And so when you have a thought, if it really is a pure, powerful thought, you won't put a space before getting it into motion. And also, we talk about the drama of life. It will conspire to take you in that direction. Now, if I have a very pure thought, and then somehow the drama around me is not conspiring, I'm coming up against obstacles, then I have to say to myself, okay, let me wait. Maybe it's not quite the right time, but that thought, let me keep the thought. And if it's a right thought at the right time, it will manifest itself. So we don't have to fight with life. That's the point. Let life flow. And Daddy Janki, who many of you have heard of, who's the young 98-year-old head of our organisation, I remember in 1997, we did an event at the Albert Hall. I don't know if any of you were there. It was Daddy Janki and Uri Geller. It was an amazing event. And the first time we did an event for so many people, 5,000 people. And a fantastic experience. I was very involved in that. And she said to me, well, not just to me, to the group of us working on it, you know, I had a thought that we should do this when I first came to London. And she first came to London in 1974. And she was very patient until 1997, when it was the right time. And it happened in a very beautiful way, in a very easy way. So easy that as soon as we thought at that time, okay, Uri Geller's the person to get with that, you know, have there with Daddy. Somebody here made a phone call to him. He said yes straight away. So things flowed of it. It's just a little example, but you'll have many examples. So it's about keeping the intention so pure, and at the right time it happens in a beautiful way.
Yeah, one thing I remember hearing in this respect is someone said that if you say to God, you know, I would like this, you only ever get one of three answers. You either get yes, or you get not yet, or you get I have something better in mind for you.
Well, actually, this brings up the whole thing of desires, and in a way, that question, should I be a yoga teacher, should I whatever or not, it's knowing when something is just my desire, and it's a desire born out of some desperation. It's a desire born out of comparing so-and-so's doing this, so I want to do it. It's a desire born out of my need to control. You know, there are various reasons why I get into the whole thing of desires. And when you know something is a desire, you feel if it doesn't happen, you feel very unhappy. You feel uncomfortable inside. That tells you it's a desire and it's a limited.
Sort of frustrated, or
you feel frustrated, you feel sorrowful, you feel rejected, you know, all those sort of hurt, why not me, you know, all those sorts of emotions come in. And that's the indication that something is a desire rather than a pure thought that's in your destiny. And then that's where you need to work on yourself to let go. And I remember there was a time when I would go to Daddy Janki. She's been my mentor over all these years, and now last few years she's been more or less living in India, but she was in London for 40 years and just had great fortune of, you know, being with her. And yes, there was a time when I would go to her with my limited desires. Oh, but I want to do this, so-and-so's doing this, you know, I didn't quite start at the age of 3, but I was quite young when I started. And, you know, you go through all your maturing process, trying to find your way through life, and you think you have to find your identity and your purpose through doing. And it was only when I began to understand that it's more through being that I got a lot more inner contentment. And she said to me something similar along the lines of what you just said. One day she looked at me and she said, well, you want this much, and God wants to give you this much. And another thing she said to me, and I mentioned it in the class this morning, she said, don't worry, whatever is your right will always come to you. And, you know, it is this thing that when it's desires, it will be limited. You'll get what you want, fine. And it'll be what you can cope with. And there may not be that much learning in it for you, because it's what you want. But if you set aside the desire and you open yourself to life's challenges, to what God really wants for you, there'll be things beyond your imagination. And the other thing is that you will be challenged and you will be stretched and you will grow and you will learn much more. And I remember once, I know I'm giving a longer answer, but I think it's really relevant. I remember once going to ask Daddy means elder sister. I said, Daddy, you know, people say that whatever comes to you in life is only as much as you can handle. Is that right? What do you think? Well, she looked at me, she said, no, it's not right. She said, if that were the case, what would be the meaning of God's help then? And that opened up my intellect. And so I said, okay, let me have the courage. You know, we have a saying in Raj Yoga, you take one step of courage and God takes 10,000 steps of help towards you. And so you have the courage to say yes, and things will open up for you. Even if you're terrified, you know, do it. And, you know, they say, feel the fear and do it anyway. Well, I'd say, feel the fear, feel God's help and do it anyway. So, yes, these are, you know, I need that also deep inspiration for my self-progress and my learning and to move myself forward.
So, I mean, that leads us quite nicely on to the question about... you know, what is it that, you know, for an individual, say for me, what is it that God wants for me? You know, there's that children's thing about, I wanted a bicycle, and I was going to ask God for a bicycle, but I knew that was wrong, so I stole a bicycle and asked Him for forgiveness.
But I haven't heard that one before.
but it's like, you know, how can we as individuals know what it is that, you know, maybe we don't have that connection, or we don't have that feeling, and we can't discriminate between what is my desire versus what is God's wish. You know, I mean, how do, in a practical way, in a real world, how do we?
Yeah, it's something that takes time to develop. You know, it's not that you just suddenly. Well, it does happen suddenly sometimes, but and it particularly develops through the practice of silence. And it's only when you, I use this word detachment, and I don't mean it in a cold sense, but in a freeing sense, that when I'm able to step away from everything and make myself free from any thoughts of what I want or what I don't want or what I have to decide, then the soul, and I'm talking about the soul because I'm a soul, this is my costume, and so it has to be at the level of the soul. I have to bring myself into that state of soul consciousness. And if you want to know more about that, of course, plenty going on around about Raj Yoga, meditation, the experience of peace. It's a whole philosophy around it. But the simple thing, I'm a soul, a being of light. This body is my temple, my costume. And so we have to not mix up the identity of the soul and the identity of the costume. So the identity of the costume is how people see me, how I look, what I do, my social status in life, my wealth, my profession, etc., etc. All the labels. If you can imagine, we walk through life with all these labels hanging off us, you know. No wonder we feel heavy at times, you know. So many labels. So when I'm able to step back from the labels and be my real self, i.e. just be that pure being, I experience that sense of peace and I experience that connection. And when I'm in that state of silence and my mind is free, then I just need to absorb the power of silence and the power of light and might that comes from God. And that, in a way, it's almost works like a waterfall, you know, to clean out your consciousness. So any sort of bits of limitation get cleaned away, you know? It's a lovely feeling. And then, okay, after a while, come back to your question. And often then, after having been in that silence, it becomes very clear. This is what I need to do. And if it's still not clear, don't think about it, because the more you think about it, the more confused you'll get. That's really a key. People get very confused. I have a question and I'm meditating on it for half an hour. Well, you'll never get the answer to your question. You'll just be thinking, and you can't meditate on a question. You have to meditate on your soul and God. Otherwise, you're just worrying. Actually, it's another word for worry. So let go, experience the silence, and come back to it, and it'll be clear. And we need this habit, I feel, of going into silence again and again and again. I was talking in the mindset, I think, about the pauses, giving myself a pause between what's coming to me and my action. Not just reaction, but pause, then response. Otherwise, we just throw ourselves into action, and then we can't filter out what we need to do. We are just overtaken by what others expect of us and what others want us to do. And then we feel, you know, totally like controlled, you know. We feel we can't be ourselves. So that practice of silence, very important.
Okay. You've touched on this just now about the concept of the body and the relationship of the self to the body, and there's a specific question here about health, and especially you could generalize this, but the specific question is my hip issue because of a lack of self-esteem, or what? You know, what's the I suppose the broader question is the connection between state of consciousness, state of mind, state of being, physical health, that thing. But that was the specific, you know, whether there's some connection there between self-esteem and
I know that sometimes people do make these quite specific connections. I've not really researched into that, so I won't comment on that specific thing. But I do understand very well that the state of your mind and the attitude you have towards life has a profound effect upon the health of the body. And if you think that the soul is here, the soul is an energy. And that energy contains all my memories, my subconscious, my feelings, my desires, my ideas, everything. It's me, basically. I am that being. And that energy sits very close to the brain. In fact, it's like it's located. Now, it seems a funny thing to say that the soul is located somewhere. I would call it more a focus for the energy, because it's the energy of the soul that's empowering the whole body and the organs and everything. But the conscious focus is there, very near the pineal gland and pituitary, which control your whole emotions and all your body functions. So you can imagine that if the brain is getting pure, healthy, positive vibrations, it's going to have an effect on your whole system, your whole physiology, and it's going to keep the body healthy. Now, I personally, and not just, it's a sensible approach. I believe in a very holistic approach. It's no good saying I'm going to have really good thoughts and then, eat and drink things that are of no good to me, or have lots of sugar, or, this body's my temple. Let me take care of it. Let me discover what my body needs, because we're all different, and some people need certain kinds of food, some people need another. And I know food is a big secret to health, actually. But that alone is not enough. And I also won't be able to do that even for myself without a positive state of mind. Because with a positive state of mind, I will value myself, the being, and I will value my body. So I want to do the best for it. And when people get depressed, we use this term, they let themselves go. They put on weight, they whatever, don't eat the right things, they get sick, and so on and so on. It's because internally there isn't value for the self. Now, I'm not meaning to criticize anyone in that sense. It's just understanding that the more I value myself, the more I will lead a healthy, productive, and positive life and make a positive contribution to society. And so keeping the mind healthy, keeping the mind connected with that higher source so that the mind is filled with good vibrations and with pure energy is definitely going to create a healthier body. And even though maybe there's illness that I need to go through, my positive state of mind is really going to take me through that. Just somebody I was talking to yesterday here, and he was saying that he had been diagnosed with cancer twice. And the second time they told him it was terminal. And then somebody said and at first he was upset. Naturally, it's, and somebody said to him, but just enjoy every day. So he started doing that. And now he's fine, and that was 6 years ago. It's so subtle, my attitude towards myself and towards life. And this is where we come back in a way to the first question, how I set up my destiny.
Yeah. Well, in a way, it's
I find all this fascinating.